If you have access to the scriptures, you can open your Bible or your app to 1 Peter 2. I'll put the scripture on the screen as well. I'm going to reference our culture as much as I do the scriptures today as we talk about personal ministry. But the scripture that I'd like to have looping in the background is 1 Peter 2, 1-5 and verse 9. Rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by men, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. I highlighted 3 analogies here as ways of thinking about your spirituality, and the first is that of a newborn baby craving milk. And this is a picture of how we relate to God. Like a baby wants the milk, needs the milk. This is how we relate to God. Very beautiful picture. There's an intimacy and closeness on the part of the parent. There's a dependence and satisfaction on the part of the baby. Like a baby goes to its mother, we go to God like that for what we need. The second picture is about how we relate to each other, like living stones. It says we are being built into a spiritual house. We're all blocks in the building. Christ is the cornerstone. Everything comes off of that, relates back to that. But structurally, we're all important pieces in what God is constructing. The third analogy is about how we relate to the world. We relate to God like a baby relates to its mother. We relate to each other like blocks relate to a building. We relate to the world like priests relate to a parish. We're a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices, a royal priesthood, he says, declaring his praises. So if you get what he's saying here, we all are priests. And the world, as John Wesley said, is our parish. This is a huge idea, very powerful, a very empowering idea that I think some companies actually get better than some churches do. One company that's particularly inspiring to me, I've followed them for years. I bought my first computer from them in 1985. Since then, every computer I've ever owned was produced by this company. I'm talking about Apple computers. I'm inspired by these guys. What started as 2 guys in a garage building a computer for themselves. And they built it. And their friends came and they were like, I want one of those. What started like that has now become the largest company in America. We're worth $500 billion, more than a third more than the second biggest company in America, Exxon, twice as big as Walmart, twice as big as Microsoft. And I've been particularly inspired by one of the co-founders who recently died far too soon from cancer, Steve Jobs. Since his death, I've been researching his life and his work. I don't know, maybe some of you are like me, but every now and then I just get on something and I just kind of get stuck on it and I start reading about it and I start researching it until I become exhausted, you know. I think there's a word for this. It's OCD, I think, is the little... But I've gone OCD on Steve Jobs, you know, just ever since he died. I mean, when he was alive, I didn't pay that much attention, and now I'm going back, and I've been struck by how visionary he was. I mean, not just in the last 10 years. The last 10 years, Apple brought to the world the iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. I mean, you think about that. 10 years, that's a tremendous amount of innovation. But I want to go back even way before that. 30 years ago, 32 years ago, I found an archived video on YouTube of a 20-year-old Steve Jobs, floppy-haired, talking to a group of reporters about what he thought computers could be, what he thought they could mean. In 1980, computers were the Wild West. I mean, it was the age of the mainframe computer. Computers cost hundreds of thousands of dollars at that time. They filled up a whole room, in a building. Only large institutions had computers back then. I mean, a university would have a computer. Maybe a large company, if they could afford it, they would have a computer. But by and large, people didn't have computers. And Steve Jobs saw something in the late 70s that ended up being revolutionary, that the computer could be personal, that everyone could have one. This was a tectonic shift. I mean, I think the shift from the mainframe computer to the personal computer, it's the biggest shift that's happened in our lifetimes. Biggest development. I mean, some of it so personal, it's in your pocket right now. I mean, you have a computer in your pocket. You think of the big change this makes, and it's really two big ideas that Steve Jobs brought together. One was that everyone should have a computer. In this video from 1980, he cites a study from the Scientific American from the 1970s about travel. And they had studied different species and how they travel and how much energy it took for them to get from one place to another place. And the condor won. I mean, they used the least amount of energy to get from point A to point B. And man actually came down the list, didn't have such a good showing, about a third of the way down the list. But somebody had taken that study and said, what about man with a bicycle? And found that man with a bicycle used less energy than a condor. That is, that man with a machine could amplify some innate ability and expand it greatly. And Steve Jobs in 1980 was talking about how the Industrial Revolution was an expansion on an innate ability that man had to sweat. But he said the next revolution is going to be an expansion of our minds. If our minds had a tool, it'd be revolutionary. And he saw the computer being that tool. And so he saw that, but he also saw this second big idea that using a computer should be easy. In 1980, Steve Jobs said, when somebody wants to use a computer to solve a problem, we introduce another problem to them, and that is, how do you use the computer? And he said, what Apple Computer is going to do is take away that second problem. So that the minute you have a computer, you can go right to attacking the real problem. And Steve Jobs in the video talks about how he went to a little school in Palo Alto, California, where they had 8 Apple II computers. And he saw a 5-year-old girl sitting there creating pictures on this little computer. And he thought, man, if a 5-year-old girl can do it, anybody can do it. If anybody can do it, anybody should do it. And think about what we could create and what we could do. So Steve Jobs said that perspective, that personal perspective, gives us the feeling that we have an opportunity to really contribute. And now we look back and go, no, it was more than a contribution. That was a revolution. Used to be that computers were for professionals. I mean, you had to have clearance. In 1980, you couldn't just use a computer. You had to be a genius to use a computer. Now, anyone can use a computer. Now, not everybody wants to use a computer. In fact, some of you refuse to do it, and that's fine, but you could if you wanted to. You could do it. In 1980, that wasn't even possible. It used to be that computers were complicated. You had to know the prompts, to put in. I mean, some of you go back to this old programming language, where there was a flashing green cursor there, and if you didn't type the right thing, or if you goofed it up one letter, guess what? Start all over again, Now, the programming's been written for you. You just use it. You just do it. Used to be that computers had very limited access. If you had a computer, company or business, or maybe a college, there might be 100 people using that computer. You had to book time. You had to schedule it. You had to fight for it, compete for it. And the whole industry was set up to support that system, actually. Microsoft, IBM, set up to support the idea that the computer was something that many, many people would be using at the same time. Then Steve Jobs comes along and gave the power to the person. You say, Dave, this is a wonderful little walk down computer memory lane, but what's the point? I'm so glad you asked. The point is that what is true for computers is also true for ministry. Whereas Steve Jobs felt that everyone should have a personal computer, I feel that everyone should have a personal ministry. And in fact, I think the parallels are kind of scary. Many believe that ministry is for professionals, that you have to be paid clergy to do that. You have to have gone to seminary to do that. I mean, you got to have ordination certificate to do that. I'm saying, no, ministry is for everyone. In fact, ministry really should be everyone. We're all priests. There's no secret handshake here. Some people think that ministry is complicated. Some people think it's so complicated that it takes a professional to do it. You know who tells that? The professionals. Now, professionalism and complication often go together, if you haven't figured this out yet, but professionals like to keep it kind of complicated. It's job security. If you can't figure it out, then you really need me. I'm saying, no. I love how Peter put it in 1 Peter 2:9. He said, just declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. That's what ministry is. Just go out there and declare his praises. Let people know. And then this third thing, I think it's this issue of access that I think it has the most implications for ministry. Is ministry a 1 to 100 proposition, or is it a 1 to 1 proposition? If it's 1 to 100, that is, let's say I'm the minister, and I have 100 people in my congregation that I need to minister to. And so each of you are trying to get as much out of me as you can. I'm trying to give as much as I possibly can. This was actually the story of my life. My first ministry, I pastored a denominational church, a traditional church, only it wasn't 100 people. It was 500, 600, 700 people. It just about killed me. When it's a scarce resource, people get competitive around that resource. I mean, you'd hear weird things, people saying weird things to each other like, you never guess who I had over for dinner last night. The pastor. And people go, what? Well, I'm planning a barbecue then. I'm going to have one. It's like, what? This is weird. This is strange. But I was the minister. And so everybody's like competing for it. Everybody's trying. When's my chance to use the computer? That's what it was like. And you know what? When it's one-on-one, when everybody's a minister, personal is powerful. In fact, the more personal, the more powerful. Robert Fulgham said there are many ministers among us. Most of them do not work for a church. I agree with that. So, this makes the potential of PM to be equivalent to what we've seen with PC. PC is personal computer. PM is personal ministry. I was thinking about calling it personal ministry styles. But then I thought, no. It's Father's Day. I want to see the end of this day. I just. But an old school way of putting this would be the priesthood of all believers, which sounds very old school, sounds very church history-ish, and it is. It goes back to the 1500s in church history. Martin Luther was a Roman Catholic priest who wanted to reform the Catholic Church. It's so interesting that we call these guys reformers. They wanted to change the church, get it to be reformed, more like maybe it should be, when you read the Bible. And the church resisted being reformed. And so the reformers kind of got kicked out. But Martin Luther was a priest, and there were priests who followed him, and they were called Lutherans. Lutherans. We still have Lutherans to this day. But one of the big ideas that Martin Luther had was that, hey, we're all priests. And here's how he said it. He said, that the pope or bishop anoints, makes tonsures. What's a tonsure? Tonsure is the shaving of the head, the crown of the head of the Catholic priest. I mean, you sometimes see this in pictures, maybe a priest has hair around all this. I mean, for me, it's just natural. God just did this for me. But that the pope or bishop would do this, anoint, make tonsure, ordain, consecrate, or dresses differently from the laity may make a hypocrite or an idolatrous oil-painted icon, but it in no way makes a Christian or spiritual human being. It says what makes you a spiritual being is not how your head's shaved or what kind of robe you're wearing. That doesn't make you a spiritual human being. He says, in fact, we are all consecrated priests through baptism. You've been baptized, you're a priest. You've now gone through the rite of priesthood. As St. Peter in 1 Peter 2 says, you are a royal priesthood, a royal priestly kingdom. And Revelation 5:10, through your blood you have made us into priests and kings. In this way, we are all priests, as many of us as are Christians. You're a Christian, you're a priest. Everyone who's been baptized may claim that he already has been consecrated a priest, bishop, or pope. Now you know why he got tossed out, right? But I mean, you're a believer, you're a pope. He goes on to say, the simplest peasant armed with the gospel is mightier than the pope. I believe that. I actually believe that. I think what happened through church history was that the ministry of all became the ministry of a few. And what needs to happen in church future is that the ministry of a few needs to become the ministry of all. We need a revolution. We need to move from mainframe to the desktop. We need to move from the centralized to the decentralized. We need to go from the professional ministry to the personal ministry that I think God had in mind all along. Ephesians chapter 2, Paul says, it's by grace you've been saved through faith. This not from yourselves, it's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. Play on words here with the word work. We don't become children of God by our works. That's not how you become a child of God, by working harder at this. It's a gift. He gives it by grace. We receive it by faith. We trust him. We receive it. We get it. That's how you become a child of God, not by works. On the other hand, he says, we are his work. We are his work. He's working on us. We are his workmanship, his work of art. The word work here, workmanship, it's an artistic word. It's not like work like slamming, like pushing, shoving. It's like sculpting. It's the word poema in the Greek from which we've derived our English word poem. We are God's poem. We are God's delicate thing that he's working on very carefully. He's trying to get it right. Why? Because the third use of the word work, there are good works which God has in mind for us to do. If you are a believer, there's work, an important work that God has in mind for you to do. This is your life's work. What you're doing 9 to 5, that pays the bills. That's not your life's work. Your life's work is what God has prepared in advance for you to do. Your life's work is as a priest. This is not a small doctrine. This is one that was dramatically emphasized. When Christ hung on the cross, at the same time he was dying, God did something. He tore the veil, the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies. He tore it from top to bottom as Jesus died. It was a big statement. He's saying this isn't limited for the few. This is for everyone. Everyone's a priest. Everyone has access. Everyone has entrance. And this just changes so many things. I think one of the first things it changes is the potential of what can be accomplished for Christ. When ministry is personal, we can reach an unlimited number of people in an unlimited number of places, times, ways. If I'm the minister, and we're going to reach as many people as I can reach, well, I can only be in so many places at so many times. I can only minister in so many ways. But if we're all the ministers, and just think of what we can do, think of where we can be. G.K. Chesterton said, to pay the pastor to be the minister is like watering your garden with a watering can while holding up an umbrella to keep off the rain. Think about it. I'm saying, throw away the watering can, throw away the umbrella, let it rain. I mean, there's so much ministry here, so much potential here. Why would I do it and try to keep you away from it? It's goofy. It doesn't work. Think about all the different life stages that are represented right here in this room today. I can't minister to every life stage. There's somebody here in this room that can minister to every single life stage. No matter where people are at, there's somebody here that can minister to them. Think about all the different hurts that we've gone through. I haven't gone through every hurt in life. I've gone through my share. But I would guess that in this room, every single thing that could happen to a person has happened to somebody in this room. There's somebody here who can minister to it. There's somebody here who can help somebody with it. Now, think about the vocations that are represented here, the industries that some of you are in, that I will never touch that industry. You're in it. You're in the middle of it. You're a missionary posted there. Think about that. I'm thinking about my friend Kevin Bell. Kevin used to be here, a part of us, and he had pastored a church in Burlington called Burlington Church. And they met at the little log building. Youth Dynamics has a log building right next to Hagen's there. They met there for many years. Kevin went through some personal life stuff that was pretty rough. He's not a pastor anymore. He's a barber. And he's got a little barber shop up in Bellingham, and I was talking to Kevin the other day about this, and he goes, you know what? You won't believe the opportunities I have to minister to guys here. And I said, I believe you. In fact, I said, I'm jealous. I mean, to think that you get to sit down with a guy and you have his undivided attention and you can have a conversation about his real life and what he's going through. I said, Kevin, you're a minister. You're not a barber. Some of you work in the restaurant industry and you're not looking at it right. You're not realizing that you have an opportunity to show the love of Jesus with every person who walks in that door hungry. Some of you are answering the phone and you don't realize you are representing God when you pick up that phone. And they may not realize it when they called, but they're talking to God. Somebody needs that love, needs that support, needs that help. I mean, think about all the geography that's represented here. We live all over the county in different neighborhoods, different pockets. We're from all different places around the country, around the world. We know people everywhere. Think about the different passions that are represented here. I mean, we all don't love the same thing. In fact, I read this article about Father's Day this week that said that, the old thing where you buy Dad on Father's Day a tool set. That's not, guys are so different from each other. I mean, now it's become much more personal. What's the guy interested in? What's the guy about, But you think about all the different sorts of men and women in this room and how we can reach in different ways. This is where it's at. I remember how George H.W. Bush talked about 1,000 points of light, in some of his rhetoric. And we don't have 1,000 people, but let's say we have 500. Could we have 500 points of light, that go out into this valley? I think we could. We could have an unlimited number of personal ministries, even if we have a limited number of corporate programs. In fact, we intend to have a limited number of corporate programs at Christ the King. Why? Because we want you to have a ministry. If we take up all your time here, or you got to do the church thing, you got to show up multiple nights of the week, you got to come, we need you to help us with this, and then please help us with this too, and help us with it. Pretty soon we've monopolized your time. We're going to have a limited number of programs, but an unlimited number of ministries. If we can free you up to do that. Second, church evolves from something you attend to something you are. You don't want to go to church. You want to be the church. Church is not a place you even go to. It's a place you go from. When you become a priest, when you have a personal ministry, you don't even see Sunday as the end of the week. You see it as the beginning of the week. You say, wow, Monday I have to go to work for God. And it's huddle time. It's getting ready time. It's getting my head straight, my heart straight. It's getting tuned up so that when I go out there as a priest tomorrow, I'm ready. Changes everything. There's a difference, I think, between being a passenger and being crew. I mean, passenger and crew all get there. If you're a passenger, you might even have a vision for where we're going, but you're not contributing to it. When you're crew, and here's what I'm saying, we're all crew. We're all crew. Yeah, we have a vision for where we're going, and we're all going to contribute to it. I love how Bud Wilkinson, who is a legendary football coach at University of Oklahoma, he said a professional football game is a happening when 50,000 people desperately needing exercise sit in the stands watching 22 people desperately needing rest. And I think the same could be said for some churches. Ben Franklin called this wasted potential sundials in the shade. And I'd say among Christians, there are too many sundials in the shade. We got to get out in the light. Number 3, every believer moves from being a receiver to being a broadcaster. Not just taking the love of Jesus, but spreading it, broadcasting it. No matter where you work. Now, I went to a store here locally early this last week and got really bad customer service. I mean, I was just like kind of blown away. And then had to go back there about 3 days later, and I was thinking as I was going there, I wonder what kind of customer service I'm going to get. I wonder if I get a different person. And I did get a different person, had the same experience. Just as bad the second time around. So I went to my car, and I was kind of like, yeah, this is ridiculous. I mean, who's the customer here? God poked his finger on my shoulder. Said, hey, Dave, who's the priest here? Who was supposed to bless who in there? I was caught. I mean, I was caught in this moment where I was wanting to be a receiver, not a transponder, not a blesser. I mean, maybe they didn't have a smile, they needed one, and I needed to give it to them. Maybe they were down, they needed to lift it up. I mean, God's saying to me, what do you need good customer service for? You don't need good customer service. Why don't you go out and give good customer service? Why don't you go out there and be a priest? I mean, when you start to think this way, it changes everything. It changes how you even relate to God, which is really my 4th point, that you have to establish connection now with God every day if you're a priest, not just on Sunday. Some of you are getting by right now just doing the Sunday thing. You can, because you're not a priest, but if you go out tomorrow as a priest, you're going to have to get in the Word. You have to get in prayer. I mean, this will change the way you relate to God. Now all of a sudden you realize, man, every day, God, I need you. I'm going out there trying to minister. I'm trying to serve you, God. I can't even do it. You've got to do it through me. And now the Christian experience becomes this real lively experience between you and God. Every day, every moment. Like, God, how are you going to use me? I'm a priest. How do I minister? How do I serve? How do I bless these people? My friend Larry Osborne, who pastors down in California, he wrote, I remember playing golf with one of our new small group leaders. Off the tee, he hit a terrible shot. Then he said a terrible word. As if on cue, he turned to me and said, whoops. And then he said something I did not expect. Instead of the usual, sorry, Pastor, I forgot you were here, he said, man, I can't talk like that. I'm a growth group leader. I knew right then we'd turned a huge corner. Rather than being shamed by the presence of his pastor, he was ashamed by his failure to live up to his new role in ministry. He saw this role as something that called him to a higher standard. You know, if you have a ministry, your life just changed. I mean, you know now you've got to get on your knees for what you need. I have to get on my knees for you. Steve Jobs was particularly missed this last week because they had the annual Apple Developers Conference. And usually at that conference, there's been a keynote address, and Steve Jobs for years has given this address. And I've for years watched it. It's usually an hour to hour and a half long video in an industry I don't really know that much about, but I found his comments to be inspiring. Do you get this idea that I might be a geek? Because I know I'm right on the edge of it for sure. I might have even stepped over the line. But so this last week, you know, it's the Apple Developers Conference. We come to the time of the keynote address, and you know, it's different, but it's the same. Tim Cook is now the CEO of Apple. And the thing about this year's conference that was so inspiring is they spent very little time talking about Apple. They spent almost all their time talking about what people were doing, the great things that people were doing with their computers. It's really inspiring stuff. I mean, people working with autism, using Apple computers, Apple products. And Tim Cook said, Apple exists to make your dreams come true. And I thought, that's why they're the #1 company in America. And I thought, man, for our church, same deal. CTK exists to make your personal ministry dreams come true. Do I have a ministry? Do I have a dream? Yeah, I have a dream. And part of my dream is to see your dream, to see you have a ministry, to see all of you deployed as priests. Let's bow for prayer.